if you're a leader and you care about what you're doing and these goals are important, you've asked, what do I want? What do I value? And you say, what I value is this goal to achieve that goal, then it's not self-compassionate to let that goal go. The most compassionate thing to do is to reach that goal. But how are you going to reach that goal? This is the key thing.
Today, we are back on our podcast, Leaders of the Future. As you know, we have brought so many personalities, thinkers who are contributing in building this podcast and giving their views about how the leadership will shape up in future. We live in a world that rewards speed, pressure, constant achievements, and we are told to be strong, resilient, and successful. But at the same time, stress, burnout, emotional exhaustion are growing, especially among the leaders, educators, young professionals, Gen Zs. We are taught how to perform better, but we are really taught how do we deal with our own self when things go wrong. Today, we explore a simple yet powerful idea. What if the way we treat ourselves decides how we're going to be leading our own self, our own life, and how can we stay well. So welcome to this podcast, Leaders of Future. Today, I am delighted to welcome Dr. Kristin Neff. Dr. Neff is a psychologist, researcher, and a professor at University of Texas, Austin. She is one of the world leading voices on self-compassion. She defines compassion and self-compassion as being kind to our own self, remembering we are not alone in our struggles, and being aware of our feeling without creating any judgment about them. She has created first scientific way to measure self-compassion. She has also co-created Mindful Self-Compassion program along with our dear friend and mentor, Dr. Chris Germer. And she is also author of Self-Compassion and Fierce Self-Compassion. We're going to talk about fierce self-compassion also in our podcast. Her work has helped millions to rethink, strengthen, and resilience leadership. Dr. Neff, welcome to this podcast, and thank you so much for accepting this invite for the podcast.
Thank you. So happy to be here and talk with you today.
I am so glad that I'm seeing you here and talking to us. One thing I felt that why are we so hard on ourselves? Most of us are some way very hard on ourselves. Studies show that most of the people are by far harsher on themselves than they would ever be towards anybody else, even towards a friend. So my question to you, why are we hardwired to be hard on ourselves? Is there any psychological reason why self-criticism feels so natural to us?
Yeah, well, actually, so our nervous system evolved to be hard on ourselves and kind to our close others. So that's just kind of the way evolution designed it. So basically, when we fail or we make a mistake in some way, or we feel inadequate, we feel personally threatened. And so what happens when we feel personally threatened is we go into fight, flight, or freeze. Our sympathetic nervous system gets activated and we feel very defensive. But of course, when we're the problem, what we do is we fight ourselves with criticisms, thinking somehow, we'll get ourselves in shape, we'll force ourselves to be different, or we flee into a sense of shame or isolation, or we freeze and we ruminate and we get stuck like, why am I so bad? Why am I so inadequate? And so this is actually a natural safety mechanism. It's really important that we realize this. Self-criticism, deep down, is just a desire to be safe. And it's the immediate instinctual reaction we have to fight when we feel threatened. Now, we also evolved to be kind and caring, but that system evolved more for close others, for children, for our family members, for our group members. That's because we are so personally threatened. Now, it's interesting when people are really close to us, like maybe sometimes our spouses, and something happens with them, then we may feel threatened and we may attack them to try to control them. But if there's just enough distance, we can actually rely on the care system, which is we know that if we take care of our family and our group members, then our genes are more likely to survive. But that's just the way evolution designed it. And then you add in culture, which gives us messages like we're supposed to be self-sacrificing, we're supposed to deny ourselves and put others first. It's selfish or self-aggrandizing to meet your own needs. Those messages just exacerbate it. So that there are very good reasons why this tends to be the case.
Very interesting. Science shows that under stress, our nervous system shifts into threat. What you just explained, or fight, or even freeze mode. And this sympathetic nervous system is also responsible for various psychological states, such as we have a narrow vision or tunneling of vision, perception narrows, thinking become rigid, reasoning drops, we react instead of respond, and survival takes priority over our clarity. The question here is that when we are under stress, how does self-compassion changes what's happening in our brain and our nervous system? And what surprised you most during your research?
Well, this is the beautiful thing about self-compassion is we're actually tapping into a system that's also natural for others, which is the care system. And we're turning it inward, which maybe feels a little awkward at first, but our body responds the same way. So there's research showing that, for instance, when we put our hands on our heart and say some supportive words to ourselves like, I'm here for you, I care about you, what do you need? That actually our nervous system responds. So our sympathetic activity goes down, our cortisol reduces, inflammation reduces, all those markers of being aroused reduce. And we start feeling, our parasympathetic system kicks in, which makes us feel cared for and safe. For instance, we get increased heart rate variability, heart rate coherence, which allows us to be more psychologically flexible. And the key here really, I think is important to underline, is the sense of safety. There are different ways we can feel safe. Our first instinctual reaction when we feel threatened is to feel safe by fighting for our survival. But the other way we can feel safe is by group bonding and like relational type of safety. And so what we're doing is we're doing a little hack of the system with self-compassion. When we put our hands on our body, there's research showing our body doesn't really know the difference if we touch ourselves in a kind way or someone else touches us in a kind way. The body responds the same way. We use a warm tone of voice and we say kind things to ourselves. Our body responds the same way. So we're using the care safety system with ourselves. And in the business world, in the leadership world, they talk so much about psychological safety and how your team needs to feel psychologically safe to make good decisions, etc. But we need to make ourselves feel psychologically safe as well. And what we find in the research is that it's a more effective way to make ourselves feel safe if we use the care system rather than the threat system. Because of course, when we're attacking ourselves, it actually increases our anxiety, which works against what we're trying to do, which is to make good decisions. So it's really all about helping ourselves feel safe. And that's why it's so amazingly effective. You asked me what surprised me about my research, how easy it is to tap into the system. I mean, there's research showing that 20 seconds a day of compassionate touch and a few kind words is enough to increase your self-compassion levels. And that's because it is a natural response for other people. So we just need to do a little perspective taking, make a U-turn, turn that response inward. And it's actually not very hard once we do that. That's the good news.
In fact, when Dr. Gurmer was here and we were discussing about the role of self-compassion for leaders, he also explained his own story and how he was able to work towards the self-compassion. I have a question for you. What personally drew you towards self-compassion? There was any moment when it became necessary in your life that, you need to work on self-compassion?
Like Chris, for me, it's a completely personal journey. I mean, maybe this isn't the mark of a good scientist, but I knew self-compassion worked, and my aim was to show scientifically that it worked because I knew from my own personal experience that it was effective. So I first found out about self-compassion when I was in my last year of graduate school getting my PhD at University of California at Berkeley in the United States. And I was going through a very stressful time in my life. I had gotten married young, and I got divorced young, and I was feeling like an utter failure in my relationships. And I was also very stressed about when I get a job after getting my PhD, that the job market was very uncertain and tight. Fortunately for me, by complete coincidence, I learned mindfulness by a group that was taught in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a Vietnamese teacher he was one of the people who always talked explicitly about the importance of compassion, not only for others, but also ourselves. So as I was learning mindfulness meditation, I was actually learning how to be kind and supportive to myself. And I saw immediately the difference it made. Just by changing my tone with myself, being warmer, more supportive, the stress became easier to bear. It didn't go away, but I felt more capable. I felt safer in dealing with it, which made all the difference in the world. And then when I did eventually get a job, at the University of Texas, I decided I wanted to research it. And then the other thread that was going on, which may interest you, is in many ways, self-compassion is about loosening the sense of self. It seems odd because we're talking about self-compassion, but actually what we're doing we're moving from the sense of self that suffers to the sense of compassion, which is interconnected. It's broader. It's bigger than our small, separate suffering self. What is this sense of self that develops? How does it help us, but how does it also work against us? And I realized that self-compassion was a very useful way of loosening that identification with the sense of separate self. One of the main ways why self-compassion works, it frees us from being locked into the suffering of the separate self.
I think everybody has a journey, a reason why they are walking towards a purpose, and finding self-compassion is an amazing purpose to work on, and you have dedicated your life on the subject of self-compassion. And self-compassion is such a subject which is not easily understood by many people. I always feel that, whenever we are under pressure, people swing into two different extremes. There's a paradoxical extremes. On one side, it's relentless self-criticism. I should have done better. I would have, not done enough effort in this thing. I should have pushed harder. There must be some fault in my thinking. That's why I have failed. On other spectrum, short-term self-soothing happens. That, whenever you fail, some people find solace in eating ice creams or stressful eating or drinking or mindless scrolling, and often justifies as self-care. I deserve this. I can do it. The question here is that how do you explain this difference between real self-compassion versus the self-pity or self-indulgence? Can self-compassion ever become an excuse for this misunderstanding of this self-loathing or self-indulgence?
Anything can become an excuse. We can misuse anything, right? That's the capacity of the human brain. So if you break down the word compassion, it's how we are with suffering, the Latin. Are we with suffering in a way that helps alleviate the suffering or that exacerbates it? And so if you think of it that way, true self-compassion is always going to be on the side of helping you be healthy and well. Self-indulgence means using short-term self-soothing strategies in a way that causes long-term harm, which exacerbate your suffering. So self-indulgence is the opposite of self-compassion. But of course, the mind is tricky, and we can say, I'm just being self-compassionate, but we aren't really asking ourselves, what is it that we need? And going back to the sense of self is really important here. What happens is normally we are totally identified with our thoughts and our emotions, our achievements, with our behaviors. Are we achieving? Are we good? We're confused those two things. So what self-compassion says is our being is intrinsically worthy. We are worthy simply because we are human beings who are existing. Our behaviors and our actions may be better or worse. I may have failed, I may have achieved, but that has nothing to do with my self-worth. So in other words, we can totally accept ourselves as worthy human beings at the same time that we say this behavior is not very healthy. Or, this failure actually didn't work out. In other words, by taking the self out of the equation and just saying, what do I need? What would work? What would be helpful? What it does is it allows us to learn from our mistakes in a very effective way. So if you're being self-indulgent with self-compassion, you can say, well, of course I want to self-soothe, because I care about myself. But what would really be good for me right now is maybe to do something else, maybe to exercise or do some other behavior, because in the long run, that's really going to help me thrive and be happy.
But there, it's a very thin line which separates self-pity or self-indulgence.
So self-pity is poor me, woe is me, like I'm separate from the world. Self-compassion means being mindfully aware of what's happening as opposed to being identified with it, confusing what's happening or what we're feeling with who we truly are. It's about being kind and kind of open-hearted as opposed to judgmental and like controlling with we should be this way or we should be that way. And it's about a sense of common humanity or connection to the larger whole as opposed to feeling isolated and separate. Those are the three components of self-compassion. So with self-pity, often we aren't mindful. We're totally identified with what we're feeling, like, oh, this is the worst, drama that's ever happened in the history of the universe, and it's only happening to me. No one else can understand. So we may have some kindness, some sympathy for ourselves, but if there's not a sense of connection to the larger whole, or if there's no mindfulness, then it's not healthy. So it's like a three-legged stool. We need all three elements for it to be healthy self-compassion. And that's one of the ways you can distinguish self-indulgence from self-compassion or self-pity from self-compassion.
We are living in a high-performance culture. I had large organization, the team of 20,000 people with me, the most successful people say, I succeeded because I pushed myself hard. So the big question comes that why is self-compassion especially important for leaders and educators today? What would you say to someone who believes that self-criticism is the reason for their success because they were so critical about themselves, so they were able to push themselves harder?
Yes. So first of all, we need to acknowledge that self-criticism does kind of work, but the research shows that it's not as effective as self-compassionate motivation. So normally people think the difference is between, pushing yourself hard or just like being lazy and complacent and not pushing yourself. But if you care about a goal, if you're a leader and you care about what you're doing and these goals are important, you've asked, what do I want? What do I value? And you say, what I value is this goal to achieve that goal, then it's not self-compassionate to let that goal go. The most compassionate thing to do is to reach that goal. But how are you going to reach that goal? This is the key thing. How are you going to get there? Unfortunately, self-criticism creates a sense of performance anxiety, right? A little bit of anxiety is good. You want to pay attention. But if your sense of self-worth is totally tied up in achieving your goal, it creates fear of failure. And it creates what's called a performance orientation as opposed to a learning orientation. You probably know about this. Performance is, what does this say about me? And then if you're afraid it's going to say something bad about you, either you aren't going to look or you're going to blame your failures on someone else. It's very hard to learn when you're shaming yourself. Shame makes it almost impossible to learn from your mistakes. A learning orientation says, hey, failure is how we learn. It's okay. We have to take risks. We got to try. And if we fail, we're going to look at it. Just because I failed doesn't mean that I'm a failure. I don't need to take it personally. What went wrong? What can we learn? What can we do better next time? And this type of learning orientation, we know over and over again from the research, is more effective at reaching your goals. We did a study with college-level athletes in the United States. So we taught athletes how to be self-compassionate about any mistakes or setbacks either in games they were having or their training routine. When your performance isn't fine, a good coach says, this is how you need to improve. They give you lots of constructive feedback. But it comes from care, not from if you don't improve, you're worthless. It's your worth is not part of the equation. You're intrinsically worthwhile as a human being. We're focused on your performance, your athletic performance. How do we get it to be the best it can be? Because that's going to help you be happy and reach your goals. And what we found is when we taught athletes to be self-compassionate in how they motivated change, their performance actually improved. Because as you said, stress and anxiety and all these negative emotions, it narrows your viewpoint. You can't see as clearly because you're so focused on, what does this say about me? Am I a bad person? And, are people going to laugh at me? What's going to happen if I fail? That narrows your viewpoint, makes it harder to learn, it makes it harder to achieve your best. But going back to psychological safety, we know people perform at their best when they know it's safe to take risks and to fail and to learn from them. That type of learning culture we know is more effective in organizations. The exact same principles apply within ourselves.
Chris had a public speaking issue. Sometimes I feel the pressure in golf is too much. So he says, why don't you try self-compassion? And I did try it and it really worked. And I can see the role of self-compassion in sports is very important. In fact, I was coaching one of the best athletes, and she told me that whenever I go for my sprint, I get very angry. I was discussing about how we can use mindfulness to deal with it, but when I started using self-compassion, I saw the change was very dramatically different as compared to mindfulness. Mindfulness is a doorway of awareness that yes, I'm angry, but the compassion is the next step onwards when you can then deal with yourself far better than criticizing yourself.
I think it's a really good time here to bring in the two forms of self-compassion, which I like to call the fierce and the tender self-compassion. And they can both go hand in hand. Tender self-compassion is the compassion of acceptance, and is aimed mainly at ourselves. We can accept ourselves, flaws and all, as imperfect works in progress. We can accept the fact that life is not always as we'd like it to be in the moment. That's just truth. And the more we accept the reality of the present moment, the more we're able to work with it. But so there's the self-compassion of acceptance, but there's also the self-compassion of action, which I call fierce self-compassion. And then part of caring for ourselves or being safe or helping ourselves thrive and be happy is by taking action. And it's not necessarily about changing ourselves, it's about changing our behaviors or doing things differently or changing situations, maybe standing up for ourselves, drawing boundaries. So anger, I call that mama bear self-compassion. A mother can be very fierce in protecting those she loves. And maybe this anger, this energy of anger can be energizing. I'm going to do it. I'm going to harness this anger, this energy of action to reach my goals. It's kind of like, the goddess Kali. What she does is she cuts away illusion and things that stand in the way of the open heart. So you can harness that anger when it's not aimed at yourself. It's not productive. It's aimed at yourself. I'm not good enough. I'm not fast enough. I'm not worthwhile. That's unhelpful. But harnessing the anger to say, I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to do my best because I care and I want to protect this thing that's valuable for me, which in her case might be the best runner she can be. That can be very useful. So you really just have to be aware of where are these energies being aimed. Is it myself and my self-worth? That's not very helpful. We need to accept ourselves unconditionally. But absolutely, that's the energy of fierce self-compassion. We need both, and one without the other is incomplete. It's like yin and yang. You need both to be complete.
I have another perspective to our discussion. We see the fear, pressure, controlling is shaping the leadership across the globe. If I ask you as a practitioner or a teacher of self-compassion, what worries you more? A world which may lack self-compassion or self-compassion being misunderstood or misused by the world?
I guess if I had to choose, I would rather that people maybe tried it and misunderstood it. Because again, if the idea is out there in the culture, it'll kind of become self-correcting, hopefully. I mean, again, we can misuse anything. We can misuse a hammer. A hammer can build things, or a hammer can be used to attack someone. Anything can be misused. But it's better to have that hammer than not to have that hammer, in the sense that I think if people are aware of self-compassion and try it out and actually ask themselves, what do I need to be well? What do I need to alleviate my suffering? Eventually, it will kind of become clear, especially with feedback from others, of what's working and what's not working. But that's why people like me are around to say, no, the research shows it's not selfish. It's not going to undermine your motivation. It's going to increase it. It's not going to make you self-focused and self-pity. It helps you care for others without burning out. It's not going to take away your personal responsibility. It's going to make it safe for you to claim personal responsibility, right? The research shows the truth of how this thing works. What can you do? You can just one step at a time, start with yourself, start with your loved ones. The way the human brain works physiologically is we have empathic resonance. So what's going on in you right now, Manish, is actually affecting what's going on in me. What's going on in me is affecting what's going on in you. We have mirror neurons. Our brain is actually designed to resonate with other brains. That's how we evolved as a species. And therefore, the energy you bring into the world, if you bring the energy of compassion, of kindness, of, a learning orientation, of being positive and constructive criticism, all those positive things actually impacts other people. It impacts your family, those people you interact with on a daily basis. And that can start spreading. When we're stuck in the illusion that we're all totally separate, then we feel totally helpless. There's nothing I can do. But when we realize we do influence other people are influenced just by what I bring into every interaction. Self-compassion isn't selfish. It's a gift you give to every single person you come into contact with as they feel your compassionate presence. You're actually changing their nervous system. Their nervous system is responding to the state of your nervous system. That's really something quite powerful that we don't think about.
It's indeed quite powerful. And that's the reason we need researchers like you and Dr. Germer to work on a subject like self-compassion. But the world is full of skeptics. There are a lot of skepticism about the concept of mindfulness, especially among the high achievers who often resist these concepts of mindfulness or compassion and self-compassion. And their success is not through this mushy ideas of compassion and mindfulness. It's hard work, it's perseverance, it's unless until you have a control over things, you can't do it. So my question to you, why do most successful people struggle so much with self-compassion to understand what self-compassion is? They feel that, if they stop being critical to themselves, they will become softer and easy.
I think, especially high achievers, if you actually look carefully at what leads to achievement, we know it's being able to learn from our mistakes. It's getting clear, constructive feedback. It's helping people adopt this learning orientation. In other words, when we fail, how do we use that failure to help expand so we achieve more next time, as opposed to just kind of spiraling into, continual failure? We know this because it works in the business context. So a leader can control his team by being mean, by scaring them, by insulting them. It does kind of work. But it doesn't work as well as that leader who empowers their employees to think creatively, especially in today's world. Maybe that worked back in the ancient days when what we had to do was very limited. It was kind of rote. We were like machines. You just have to do what you're told. Today's world is not just do what you're told. Today's world is think creatively, respond. There's so much uncertainty. There's so much constant change. We need to be agile, and we need to learn, and we need to be able to respond to continually changing conditions. You can't do that if you're in the narrow shame kind of I'm a failure, I'm not worthwhile mindset. You need to be able to broaden your view, be adaptive, learn quickly on your feet. And self-compassion, constructive criticism, helpfulness, being an ally as opposed to an enemy to yourself, it's just going to enable you to do better. It's self-evident. I think it just maybe hasn't been explained to people that way. And then usually once you explain it, people kind of go, that kind of makes sense. I taught the men's basketball team these principles. I didn't use the word self-compassion once. I talked about inner strength training. How can you be strong on the inside? How can you help yourself bounce back from failure, learn optimally, achieve your goals? All the same principles apply. You do not need to use the word self-compassion. Compassion, I think, is associated with the tender form, the accepting form. And in some contexts, that may not be helpful. So just don't use the word. Talk about inner strength training. Talk about resilience. And use all the same principles.
I think a lot of people are stuck in the nomenclature of the word rather than understanding the real essence behind it. Because when you rightly said, when you use word compassion, it always denotes a softness and easiness. And that's the reason many organizations fear that compassion may weaken their leaders, make them softer, lower the standards. Especially in this part of the world where every organization, every individual is designed on command control style. There has to be some commanding power, then some obeying power, and that doesn't work on compassion at all. We have never understood the role of love in leadership because we were told, keep your emotions at home and come with a straight face to work. Work is work. You have to do 10 to 5 or whatever time, finish your work. If this is the premise, how can an organization build a culture of self-compassion without lowering performance and building excellence, responsibility, and accountability in fierce manner?
This is where people like you are the expert. So I've been in academia my whole life. I think this is where people like you, translators, to think about how do we use these principles in the workplace context. If you're in an environment where people are so afraid of taking a risk because they may get harshly punished in some way, they aren't going to be good, effective risk takers. You aren't going to be able to think clearly. Their focus is going to narrow. So really, I think the biggest thing about self-compassion is it's really what you're saying is it's okay to make mistakes as long as we take responsibility for them and learn from them, because we are human beings. The expectation that we're never going to make mistakes, we're never going to fail, is an incorrect one. It's an illusion. That's not the way things actually run. So creating a culture, leaders have a very important role to model this. I'm going to try to avoid mistakes. Of course I am. I'm going to do my due diligence to try to make the best informed decision I can. But this is how we learn. We make mistakes. We don't take them personally. We learn from them. We try again. When things are tough, instead of just giving up or blaming ourselves, we say, how can I support myself and others in this moment? What's required to help everyone feel safe? But also, we don't want to just stay at safety. We need to challenge ourselves so that we grow. That's also part of compassion. Your kids, if you're a parent, you want to challenge your kids to reach their full potential while they know that you have their back. It's so much easier to take risks when you know that, the people behind you are there for you. They're going to support you. They aren't going to just tear you apart if you fail. So creating a culture of learning, that it's okay to make mistakes as long as we take responsibility for them, all of that is going to help an organization function more effectively. So again, modeled by leaders, starting with themselves. If a leader can say, yeah, I made a mistake. It's okay. What can I learn from this? It doesn't mean that I am a bad person because I made a mistake. If you talk about that, help people remind each other of the fact that, hey, we're doing the best we can. What can we learn from this? Whether it's in sports or if it's in an organization, the most compassionate question is, how can I learn and grow from this? That is the definition of compassion in these contexts. So using that as the bottom line, it's all about learning. It's all about growing. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're separate or you're isolated. Trying to take shame out of the equation. Shame is not helpful. Bullying is not helpful. Name calling is not helpful. And then once you have that culture of it's safe to take risks and learn, then that's when an organization really can become agile and respond to all the uncertainty in the world today.
That's a bridge I've been working, and I think now it's 15 years now we've been working on it. We quit our corporate careers and we found that, most of the leaders are trained to be very harsh, do self-criticism, find faults, and you keep carrying a facade constantly. You need to create your image, and this is how you need to be. You need to show yourself strong. You don't break down. And I think those are sort of ideologies are now breaking down. Those ideas does not work anymore. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to make a mistake. Both sides have to understand, even the people in the team have to understand that leaders also can do mistakes. You can't have a very high bars or high benchmark for a leader that, my leader cannot do mistakes. Your parents can do mistakes.
The whole thing is we don't need to take it personally. This is where the sense of self is so important. We need to see where it rears its ugly head everywhere. You can make a mistake. You don't have to take it personally. Your team can make mistakes. You don't have to make it personal. There's a mistake. We want to correct it. How can we learn and grow from it? When we take it personally, we think I'm a failure, I'm inadequate. It saps our energy away from being able to learn and grow and do better next time. And in some ways that's so obvious, but because of the ego wants to attach and identify with success and failure. And it just kind of takes energy out of the system. We can use criticism. Let it be constructive criticism. It doesn't have to be personal. It doesn't mean I am bad. It's like, that didn't work. What can I do better next time? And once you take your own ego and your own self-worth out of the equation, it frees up so much energy to learn and grow and do better next time. And that can be contagious.
Yeah. And I think that's also the mental makeup. Mindfulness plays very important role in this whole process, where it drops the illusion, it drops the ego, it drops the self, which is very perfect. So that whole thing drops down. You drop down the judgment, and I think that's the room you create for compassion or self-compassion to play on. Otherwise, self-compassion alone cannot sustain for a very long time.
Right. Well, so mindfulness is part of self-compassion. From my point of view, there is no self-compassion without mindfulness. There are these three elements. Mindfulness creates the space, so we aren't so identified with what's happening, so we can actually have a little awareness of what's happening. We aren't locked into it. The kindness creates the warmth. So it's not like mindfulness is not like totally neutral. It's like we care. We care. We want to be well. We want to meet our goals. We want to reach, our full potential. And then the common humanity creates the connectedness. We aren't alone. We aren't separate. We're part of a larger whole. And we need these three elements, the space, the warmth, and the connectedness, from my point of view, to be a stable, healthy mindset. Each of these alone can be helpful, but they really need to be all three together in order for it to create a compassionate mindset. At least that's my view. After 20 years, I believe in it more than ever, because you take any one of those elements out and it just kind of falls apart.
I'd written a book called Observe. It has about 101 practices, and which I started with creating a space for your own self. And I think mindfulness creates that space. Mindfulness is, I think it's empty otherwise. One thing I wanted to take an advantage while you are here, there's a very big issue which we're seeing a world trend, and you have spoken a lot about it, and Chris also has spoken about burnout and recovery. We are seeing a very trend globally, even in India. The recent news we see, young founders and CEOs are dying, they are having bad health or heart issues. They are going through severe consequences of this burnout in 40s and 50s. Burnout is no longer rare, it's a widespread epidemic. I wanted to hear from you how self-compassion interrupts this burnout cycle for leaders, and why it is so often the missing ingredient in our recovery. We don't talk about it. We talk about many other things, but we never talk about these things in this recovery process on burnout.
If you think about what burnout is, it's when basically we aren't capable of handling the stress that we're experiencing. We get overwhelmed by the stress in our life. And if you think about it, self-criticism exacerbates stress. Self-compassion reduces stress. So there are three core symptoms of burnout. One is just exhaustion. We've got so much on us. It's already hard enough to deal with. But the way self-compassion reduces exhaustion, some of it's just practical. With fierce self-compassion, also we learn to say no, to draw boundaries. We validate our human limits. We actually say, I cannot take that on. It's just too much. And when we fail, when we fall down, we don't judge ourselves mercilessly for it, so that reduces our stress. Another part of burnout is feelings of incompetence, right? So we do judge ourselves. We take it personally because we take everything personally. We feel like we should be able to handle the stress. When we can't, judge yourself. Again, that exacerbates our stress. Self-compassion says, of course you can't handle it. You're only human. You're an imperfect human being. You don't have the unlimited ability to handle stressors. So you're kind and supportive. You ask yourself, what do you need? What would help right now? Again, and that might be taking time off. It might be self-care activities. If that's not possible, it's at least emotionally supporting yourself in those moments of overwhelm as opposed to judging yourself, saying you should be able to handle it. And then the third core symptom is really interesting. It's called depersonalization, which basically you just start caring less, because people who care the most are the people who are most susceptible to burnout because you care. And so self-compassion gives us a way to keep our hearts open. We can still care, whether it's about our children or our business or the world. We can still care even when we can't achieve the goals in the moment that we'd like to. I can ask myself, what do I need? What might help? Maybe just small steps, step by step. And then what happens when you keep your heart open, when you're self-critical and judgmental and shaming yourself and totally stressed, you can open your perspective because the warmth helps you feel safe, so you can look around and say, well, maybe that's something I hadn't thought of before. Maybe that's an opportunity over there. Maybe this is a different way of responding to the situation that's going to be more effective. So self-compassion both helps prevent burnout by helping interrupt that negative cycle that makes burnout worse. And it also helps you recover from burnout by giving you that perspective to think, are there other options to deal with this? So
that's a great advice for people who are going through cycle of burnout, because it's a downward spiral. Once you start going downwards in that, your self-rumination, self-referential thinking, self-criticism, this all add on to your burnout, and before you realize you are already down the spiral, and very difficult to cross that ridge or that ditch you fall into, and recovery becomes difficult. And I think self-compassion helps you to then see a perspective which is far more warmer, and then you are able to recover. The one thing which causes burnout, which I have seen, our inability to say no to situations or things. I have seen in my own career, sometimes you are so much burdened, you're overloaded, you don't say no to things, and it just keep on falling onto you, and mentally, psychologically, physically, you break down, and it has a severe consequences. How can somebody lead a healthier boundaries and stronger relationship and with your own self?
Yeah, so I love the concept of boundaries, and the research does support, for instance, that people with self-compassion and better work-life balance are more able to say no. There's two main reasons why we often don't draw boundaries. One is we want to be a people pleaser. We want other people to like us because our self-worth, instead of coming from the inside, it comes from the approval of others. We say yes to everything because we want to be seen as helpful and, a team player and all those things. And then the other thing, which is also kind of related to this self-esteem issue, is we aren't very humble. Like we think I should be able to take it on. I should be able to handle all these things. You know, I'm a Superman or superhero, and I should be able to do anything if I am a really good, competent person. For self-compassion, we realize we are only human. We can't take everything on. Sometimes we have to say no. So, self-compassion allows us to let go of other people's judgments of us. Yeah, they may not like it, but I need to do this for myself. And I need to acknowledge that I can take maybe a lot on, but I can't take everything on because I'm just a human being. So this is part of the reason why it helps us do boundaries. And by the way, the research also shows, when there's a conflict, like I have a need and you have a need, self-compassionate people don't say, it's all about me and I don't care about you. They also don't say, it's all about you and I don't care about me. It's like, you're worthy and I'm worthy. How can we try to meet everyone's needs? How can we come up with a compromise solution in which everyone's needs are heard and to the extent possible met? So I don't like it if you're going to draw a boundary if you don't care about what I need at all. But if you say, well, I see your need is valid, but my need's valid too. What can we do? How can we come up with a solution that tries to create some sort of balance? That's just much more effective for everyone.
That's a very strong point. I think we need a lot of maturity to come to that point where we understand that this is my need and now my boundaries are here, and this is my family need or my organization need or my social needs. I think there's a level of maturity has to come, and the concept of self-compassion has to be very, very clear, and fundamentally people realizes what they are talking. And we need researchers like you and Dr. Germer to talk about it and write about it. Today everything is bite-sized, small. Movies are become like small programs. If you could offer a one mindset shift of understanding of self-compassion, a daily practice to a leader or educator or our young Gen Zs, which help them to lead with greater wisdom, resilience, humanity, what would that one practice would you?
I got to do two practices. You have to forgive me because the probably simplest practice is working with your physiology. And so some sort of physical touch, again, the research shows that 20 seconds of some sort of supportive physical touch, whether it's hands on heart or face or hands, something, because when you work to calm down your sympathetic nervous system, it allows things to flow more easily. So I would not exclude that. Work with your physiology and your parasympathetic nervous system. And then very simple, am I being a good friend to myself? If I said what I just said to myself to a friend, what would be the reaction? We just be a good friend to yourself and work with your nervous system by using, just like with a friend, you might put your hand on their shoulder to let them know you're there for them. You do that with yourself, plus a few words of kindness. 20 seconds a day is enough. I don't care how busy you are, you have 20 seconds.
I think that these are short and everybody has 20 seconds. The only thing is we need to consider ourselves as a best friend for our own self in life. Most of the time we look for some maseha or some teacher outward, but we don't realize that we are the wiser self for our own self. So thank you so much, Dr. Neff, for today. And thank you for reminding us that leadership isn't about just results. It's also about how we treat ourselves along the way.
And you're a model for your employees and team members. The most important model. That's what a leader is a model, a role model.
In a world that keeps telling us push harder, or your work remind us that, kindness towards oneself is not weakness, strength that lasts longer. So to everyone listening today, I thank Dr. Neff for sparing her time and sharing her valuable thoughts. And I'm so delighted that I could speak to you today. And to everyone listening, the future of leadership may not start with changing others, but it starts with listening to your own voice and how you speak with your own self every day. Thank you, Thank you so much, Dr. Neff, today. And I'm so delighted that we were able to discuss about self-compassion today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.